So in this video, I want to talk in more depth about Criterion B, which is about mathematical communication. Um, and a lot of this we've already learned about, so I'm going to go kind of quickly through the beginning of this. The IB guide really sums up this criterion reasonably well in a couple of points. That it's supposed to be about using appropriate mathematical language and not computer notation, defining key terms, and using multiple forms of mathematical representation. But what the guide doesn't tell us is how each of those mathematical representations should be handled in mathematical writing. So the purpose of this document and the video associated with it, the purpose of this video is really for me to share with you about how formulas and equations should be handled when you write them in math. And you've seen a number of these through the mini IAs that I've given you guys, but I wanted to cover this one and all the other forms explicitly. So first, the purpose of formulas and equations. This is probably pretty clear, but the purpose of formulas and equations is to give you a distinct, clear, well-defined relationship between multiple variables. So if you are working through your exploration and you have multiple variables and you want to talk about how they're related, a formula or an equation is the way to do it. So what I'm going to be doing in the rest of this video is first going over this bit of guidance that I have, and then looking through a couple of, actually kind of want to take an example and go through go through levels of how well you could write these kinds of things mathematically. So the first bit of guidance that I have is remember that the formulas and equations should really fit into the flow of the document. You're writing a math paper, you're writing a math exploration. So your purpose in the document is to explain what you want to show and help the reader to understand it. Equations and formulas might be a part of that explanation, but ultimately you're doing an explanation, not just showing off a bunch of formulas. When presented, formulas should pretty much always be centered, like in the middle of the text, and any variables you have should be clearly and completely defined very near the formula. Just because you define something earlier in a paper doesn't mean you shouldn't bring it up again later. It's easy for readers to forget and lose track of what those variables are. And so, if you go back through and read your paper and realize, I'm not sure that's a little, that's clear, you just put something in later like, remember that t represents time in seconds. Here's the formula we're looking at next. So you want to define them well the first time around and quickly again when necessary. About defining variables. It is incredibly rare for a variable to be properly defined in only a single word. You don't need to be long, you don't need to take sentences long, but it's appropriate for the definition of a variable to be like a full phrase or a sentence, and you'll see that in the examples in just a second. The last thing I would say is be mindful of units. If units are something that you recorded in your investigation, in your exploration, you should include them when you're defining the variables. So now, like I said, I want to look at kind of one running example of this. So this first example is, imagine you're doing an exploration about the height of an object that's been thrown into the air. Okay, so as an example, somebody might write this. And I'm not going to read it out loud to you, but someone might write that, and it might be formatted just like that. In fact, I'm doing this video in Word so that it looks exactly like what it would look like in a document. So if someone submitted this, right, what would you think of it, and what would I, as a math examiner, think of it? So things that were done well. So first of all, the formula was presented using symbols and notation. Okay. And I mean, they use symbols, they use notation. The notation seems kind of appropriate, but I'll get to that in a second. Second, the formula was included in a sentence in their exploration. In other words, it wasn't just like plopped in the middle of something. So it makes sense. It says, in this exploration, we'll use this formula. Okay. In this formula, h equals height, t equals time. Okay, fine. So these are two things that are done reasonably well, but there's a lot that could be improved. First of all, the formula was clearly not typed using some type of equation editor. I don't know if you noticed this, but like the equal sign, like the minus seems kind of small. I mean, it's just a dash. There's no spacing in it. And I don't know if this is something that you guys notice, but for me, when you put this next to an edited equation, The edited equation just looks so much better. Second, remember that formulas, equations, and expressions are usually on their own line and centered. And this would especially be true for a formula like this that's going to be used a lot throughout your exploration. This formula is a big deal. You want to let it shine in your exploration. You want to set it aside. So another thing that could be improved, there was an attempt to define variables, and that's good. I'm glad that the example tried to do that. But the definition was weak. The variables are all basically single words. H is height. What is height of what? Height, T is time when. Like, these things could mean so much. We want more than a single word. The last thing is, this right here, in my opinion anyway, is what some mathematicians would call an abuse of the equal sign. The equal sign really should be used to show equality of two mathematical expressions. So we really shouldn't say h equals height. You should really say something like h is the height of the object. My face froze again. See if I can bring that back real quick. There we go. So when you define variables, I would really, really highly recommend that you not do it with the word equals. Instead, write it as a sentence, write it as a little phrase. I don't want this video to be too long, so let's keep going. Example 2, so the second one. I took the same information and I formatted it a little bit differently, right? So take a moment to read that, and more than read it, like look at it. Look at how that thing is formatted and shown. So done well. The formula was presented using appropriate symbols and notation. So now the spacing on this equation is just so much better, right? The negative sign looks like a negative sign. It's not, if you remember looking at this one up here, this minus, that's so small you could lose it, you could miss that, right? This is clearly its own sign, and it's given the same amount of space and size as the plus sign. So in this case, the formula was clearly formatted using appropriate symbols. Second thing done well, the formula was now centered and included as part of a sentence, the exploration. So it's still in the sentence. In this exploration, we'll use the formula for the height of an object that's been thrown upward, and then bam, here's the formula. There's a period at the end because it's a sentence, but that formula really gets a chance to shine where it is. The third thing done well, the formula was clearly typed using a type of equation editor, and the letters look different. I already mentioned that one. I don't know why I wrote that twice. Thing that could be improved. The definition of the variables was still weak. I didn't use the equal sign anymore. Now I said h is height instead of, h equals height. You'll notice that the v0 and the h0 are the same formatting as this. For these ones, I really shouldn't have just typed t. I should have put in the equation version of t so that it would look the same. Right, and I'll update that for the notes that you guys will have for this. I just noticed as I was doing the video here. But you see how the formatting of this T and the H look just like these? You're not going to lose points for that on the IB exam, or on the IA more than likely. But this is good form. This is the way that we should do things. Let me get to the third version of this where I did it kind of as well as I could. So in this exploration, we'll use this formula, yay, and then you can see here, take a moment to read the definition of those variables. If you need to, pause the video. You can see that I said, the fact that these are in black text means those are the same done well from before. Green is the new ones. So the variables are now clearly and completely defined, including units. So you can see I said t will be, not just time, t will be the amount of time in seconds that has elapsed since the object was thrown upwards. So now it's very clear what t means. V sub 0 will be the initial velocity of the object measured in feet per second. Again, clearly defined. H sub 0 will be the initial height of the object above the ground of the object in feet. These variables will you use to find h, which is the height of the object above the ground in feet at t seconds after being thrown. I'm trying to define all these really precisely. Another thing that I tried to do well here, or at least showed you as an option, the somewhat large number of variables, 4, was offset by writing, by placing the independent variable into its own sentence. So instead of making this a huge long sentence, I basically had one long sentence that handled all of these variables on the right side, the independent variables. Oh, actually, I just realized this should have been writing the dependent variable. H is kind of our dependent variable. That's the thing that we're going to be, like looking at. So I put all of the independent variables and parameters here, and then explained what the left-hand side, what the dependent variable is, in a separate sentence. I didn't really see any weaknesses for this one because I tried to write it really well. As a quick note, I wanted to mention that in one of my mini IAs, it was the Just Dance one, I defined all the variables by putting them into a bulleted list. I think this was appropriate there because there were 8 variables. Trying to write all 8 of those into a long sentence just would have felt weird. It wouldn't have looked right. You should use your own best judgment for whether your variables should be combined into a sentence or whether they should be placed in a list. In either case, always remember to clearly and completely define your variables. So I hope that by looking at these 3 things like right next to one another, you can identify ways that you might be sort of not using equations and formulas quite as well as you could in your mathematical writing. So I hope that made sense here, and I hope that you'll check out some of the other videos that I'll be doing about tables, graphs, charts, diagrams, other mathematical objects. So best of luck as you keep working to be math writers.